Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chistakomaki, Dakots Nagotinesiku. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody on this Canadian Thanksgiving or Columbus Day if you're in the States. And I know some states actively are working towards getting it changed to Indigenous Peoples Day. So that's really an interesting way to be talking about today's book out of all books, because as I usually do, when I do read a book, it's usually last minute. So yesterday and today I read this book, and I just found it interesting while I was also on social media reading about the horrible things that Christopher Columbus had done, to be and what was happening in Palestine, to be seeing all of this kind of together and while reading this book. So I found it like full of anxiety. One of my favorite movies of all time is that series of 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later. And honestly, it was like reading that from an Indigenous point of view the entire time. So I had this like horrid anxiety reading this book, because I think about when the racism of settlers, and that was so, the few interactions they had with white people were so ugly, and it just made me feel like that 28 days, and that you see the making of these white only militias here in North America, and it's like it's a real thing, it's a real worry for me. And then knowing that if things go south and people have the opportunity to kill me, they will. It's really, really horrid. So I found that very that was an anxiety I've been feeling for 2 days. I have a massive headache. I don't know if it's from the weather change or from the anxiety of reading it. So yeah, I really loved the book. I loved the book. I loved the reclaiming of their language and attempting to go to older ways. And I loved how they helped each other, and they seen the need to help each other, as opposed to the militia folks who only wanted to kill people. And that moment where they called that one guy a turncoat and killed him, like it was just so horrid, just that lack of empathy, just that horrid feeling. And then of course the implied violence, sexual violence against Indigenous women, every interaction, just like ugh, just that horrid feeling that you have all day of anxiety. So I found that really difficult to kind of navigate watching what was happening on social media as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I thought of the book. I wanted to let everybody know that the author, he did say he would come today, but I would respectfully understand why he couldn't make it, because it's a holiday, and maybe him and his family actually are having a good time, and I would rather him be doing that, right, than to if that's what he's doing. To me, it's really important that Indigenous people have joy. And in his case, as an Anishinaabe, having a young family. Yeah, and he posted on his Facebook that he was going to be putting these characters to the side. So I was going to ask him what he meant. You guys are going to see that right on my closed captioning. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. We're so happy you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Just got the last kid in bed, so
I
can
love
read
this
downstairs.
problem. Oh my gosh, I love this problem. I'm so grateful you're here. I suppose I should introduce myself to you. I'm Satu Dene. My family is from Deline up in Northwest Territories. My mom had me down here in Calgary, so I've never actually lived up there. I've visited a few times, but I've never lived up there. So for me, it was really interesting starting to see all these Indigenous authors writing about different things. And we were so happy to do your other books as well. So
Oh,
having you here is like such a treat for us. And
oh,
I'm
for
just
me.
so honored you would be here. We're almost all from Treaty 7 in Mohkinstsis in Calgary in Blackfoot territory. We have one other person who likes to not be recorded. We're recording right now. And so what I do is that every, people want to take a turn, I just pause it for that other person so that they feel comfortable sharing, because that's what we want to do is create a safe space, right? So yeah, so that's a little welcome to our Chapters in Chat book club that we've had since 2016. And yeah, so as a result, we've been able to go through a few of your other books as well. And I'm just so
Oh,
excited to have you here.
oh, miigwech. Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm so honored that you've all taken the time to read my books and to invite me to join you all. And it's great to see you again, Michelle. I think it was about a year ago that I last saw you in Calgary there. So
You know what?
yeah,
I was looking at the date because I dated it and it was
yeah.
October 30th. So it's almost been a full
Was
year
it
since
okay?
I seen you. Yeah.
Oh, man, it doesn't seem like that long ago either, eh? Holy jeez.
No,
Wow.
it doesn't. And I'm getting ready for WordFest for next week. So, Murray
Nice.
Sinclair is going to be here and his son and all these folks are coming here. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm just getting through last year's for WordFest books. But I recently got diagnosed with ADHD, so now it makes sense why I needed a book club to have a deadline to read a book
There you go.
and force myself to read. So it's great to have you here. You know what? I was just telling the folks about your latest Facebook page or a Facebook status saying that you're probably going to be putting these characters to rest. I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's been the really opportunity of a lifetime, and honestly the greatest creative and professional gift to be able to spend time with these characters in the story for like the last 10 years essentially. And yeah, it changed my life, writing the first book. I thought I was going to be, a CBC journalist for a long time and, I'd be writing fiction in my spare time like I had been doing already for a few years by that point. And then that story found, a pretty enthusiastic and really supportive audience. And that led me to, explore the second book, right? But, getting to this point, I think, like I do see not to totally shut the door, but like I see a little bit of finality in the ending of Moon of the Turning Leaves, but I'm not closing the door on getting back into that story eventually at some point. But I want to try to write some other things. There are some other kinds of stories I want to try to get at, and I think if I spend some time away from the characters and the story, then they'll probably like stoke the fire to get back with them eventually at some point. So
Amazing. I cried. I bawled all like
uh,
an hour ago because that's when I finished your book.
oh no
So
way.
no joke. so so I was crying for like an hour just
Oh
before
no
here
way.
because I'm like, oh, because I had read your status. So I'm like, I knew this was the end. But like to
Yeah.
be fair, I do agree with you. I think it is like it's nicely wrapped. Like it can be
Mhm.
done now if you wanted it to, but if you come back, that'd be amazing. Um, I can't imagine what it's like to write a book, but I can tell you that, if you feel that emotionally attached to it, like it has to be well written. I remember like there's so many pieces of it that I thought you described so well. And I was just telling the folks just before you came, like how much anxiety I felt through the like 2 days now of anxiety because one of my favorite movie series is that 28 days and then 20 weeks later, 28
Mm.
weeks later. And that's the feeling I got from this, right? Is that you're
Oh, yeah.
being kind of stalked by these white militia. So I'm like, this is what it feels like again. So I really really enjoyed that. But you know, I'm seeing that we have another Indigenous friend here who has come. Kathy, I am going to ask you if you want to just pop in for a minute. I don't know if her connection's working well. Let's see here. Ask to unmute.
Hi.
There we go. Okay, Kathy, would you like to chime in about the book and ask the author anything you'd like?
Um, I really, really, really enjoyed the book. It was a weird feeling. I was almost jealous of, somebody that lived on the res and had that connection to, like it was just like it was so good. And yeah, those funny feelings of jealousy was just yeah, you really, really like brought it home that what it would be like to be connected with your res, right? And um I loved it. I read the second book too, so I'm like, okay, I'm ready for a third. But yeah, I sorry, I was having a fire and cleaning up my backyard, so I got to mute and get some food in me and stuff. So, but I'm
Okay.
listening.
Right on.
Okay,
Miigwech, Kathy. Appreciate that.
thanks. Bye.
Awesome. Yeah, Kathy's been one of our regulars forever here too. And so I'm just going to kind of go down our participant list. We'll go Kat, Rosemary, Naomi, our friend that I'll mute for, and then Wendy. And yeah, so if you just want to talk to him or have any questions or reflections, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Kat. I'm a settler from Treaty 7, British and German descent. I loved this book. I'm a big fan of the post-apocalyptic genre, so it was amazing to see it from an Indigenous viewpoint. My question I thought earlier today is like, how did you choose which characters, and they're all amazing characters, and it was really hard to leave them as well. How did you choose which ones to have die, pass away? It must
Yeah.
be hard.
Oh yeah, very hard. Well, thanks, Miigwech, for that, Kat. Like it's all planned out. I'm pretty I'm not totally strict about staying to like a plan or I guess a framework for my novels, but I find that is really helpful for me in terms of like getting things written. So there's like a sequence of events that I'm always like using to guide me, right? And that's just like in point form in documents on my laptop. So each death, was planned and was expected. And the death of JC, I'm not spoiling too much, am I? Everybody's okay, good. So the death of JC, was always gonna come, and I think having him die, like there's a lot to that, having like some of the older members of a community or of a group pass on, like there's significant loss connected to that, and I think that is loosely connected to really some of the ongoing hardships we have in our communities of people with knowledge dying, but also um dying before they're really that old, to be honest, right? Which is a really tough thing for me and my community to deal with, especially, like we have a lot of ongoing tragedies in our community. People aren't living to be elders, right? So JC, like he has this knowledge, and like he's, it's this unfortunate mishap that takes him out, right? And I guess the reason I chose him was because like he um at that age, he's essentially also like sacrificing himself for the greater good, for the group, and so on. And at that particular moment, I think he also he like makes, you know, just sort of a mental mistake, right? Like he sort of drops his guard a little bit, and he forgets that he's in this kind of foreign place, even though it is his people's homeland, right? So that like causes him to break his leg, and then he can't go on. So like that was always planned out, but like the moment I got up to actually writing that part out, it was devastating. I took a week off after that because like when I wrote him dying and then like the funeral and all that, I was like, oh man, that just hit too close to home for me in many ways. And yeah, so I took a week off. And then with Evan dying, like that was a pretty tough call from the beginning, you know. I was like, well, he essentially has the same outcome at the end of the first book, right? At the end of the second one, he gets shot again. But in the first book, it's like totally vague as to where he's been shot, how many times he's been shot, and so on. And to me, that infers that he survives, right? But at the end of the second one, I was like, well, I got to make it clear that he dies. And I think like, you know, I didn't have to have him die, but at the same time, I wanted him to be emblematic of this sacrifice that people make for their community, for their future, and so on, right? And yeah, that was like equally devastating too. But yeah, it's just to me, it was just part of the process, and I think recognizing the people that do make sacrifices for our future, which essentially both of those guys do in the story.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Both of those deaths were so beautiful, by the way. I just cried for both of them, just the way we did our traditional ways with that. And I just, yeah, it was so heartbreaking. Rosemary, can we unmute you?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. You are a wonderful storyteller.
Thank you, Miguel.
Okay, good. Yeah, I had trouble putting it down to go to bed, you know. I wanted to keep reading. It's interesting that we've been discussing the deaths, because what really struck me, especially with JC's death, was, you know, they're on this journey, and yet they honored him so much that they spent the 4 days, right, to observe what they felt they needed to do so his spirit, his soul could go where it needed to go. And it was such a contrast to the militia guys just popping each other off, and who cares, there they are, you know. Yeah. Evan's death really hurt because I kept thinking of Nicole, you know, left behind, because that was such a tender, loving scene that you created between the two of them, right before he began his journey. I feel as Michelle did about many of the things here, you know, the reclaiming of the language. And I love that at the end of the book, the epilogue, there was so much more of the language being spoken, which was kind of representative of what was going on. And people not only going back to old ways in terms of tradition, ceremony relating to each other, but when they were repairing the fishnet net, they're running out of that particular wire they needed, but they're thinking, right, of the alternatives they're going to use. And again, you had the feeling that the militia guys, once they ran out of all their ammo and this and that, I don't think they would have been surviving much longer, right? But this group of people did. I also loved the part where they're talking about pizza. It was so humorous. it was really good. I have other things, but I think I'll stop because I'm sure other people have the same things they want to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that. I guess, yeah, what can I touch on from there? Yeah, like the juxtaposition of the militia guys against the group. You know, there's a like with the militia in particular, I had to think of like a bad guy, right? Or bad guys, you know. you know, it was always going to be, the story was always going to be about this quest to this homeland, right? To reconnect with it, and also to sort of find some answers to the blackout and the supposed end of the world and all that, right? And I knew that, you know, to broaden it out for the sake of tension, for the sake of drama, I needed to have antagonists.
Mhm.
And making, you know, one bad guy, I think would have been too similar to the first book. So I had to think of a different way to approach that. And also like who would be surviving after the end. And you know, and I thought I took the old Stephen King route and thought, you know, what scares me? What would scare me
Mhm.
in this scenario, in this future? And it's almost always like well-armed neo-Nazis, you know, like those
Yes.
are scary dudes, right?
Mhm.
I thought, okay, well, how about, you know, I make those the bad guys, and it really clicked. I didn't have to look too far to build on that, because like, you know, January 6th happened like 2 days after I started writing the first draft to this story.
Oh my goodness, that's wild.
Yeah, it was like this weird, totally weird timing. And then, you know, like I did a bit of research into preppers when I was writing the first book, and then the second one I was like, okay, I want to like dive a little more deeply into these guys. And yeah, you just got to go on YouTube and you find dudes like the disciples, you know, like there's an acronym you can type into YouTube, that's SHTF, which means shit hits the fan. And you get all these videos of all the preppers and what they're doing to get ready for the end, right? And
Mhm.
some of them are like, you know, legitimate, you know, survivalists who, you know, are just, you know, trying to find good ways to survive. But others like use some coded language and, you know, have like some subtle hints here and there about, you know, blood and soil and shit like that, right? And all that kind of thing. These guys will take you like on tours of like their bunkers or their basements, and they'll show you like these bins of ammo on one wall, all these different calibers and so on, and then another wall they'll have like all their guns. And then they'll take you into the back room of the pantry where they have like rations stored and cans of food and all that. And a common thread throughout a lot of them, if you decide to do a deep dive into these videos, is most of them are planning on using ammo for currency. Like that's what they think is going to be currency after the end of the world, right? And also to use it as, you know, for weaponry and so on. But yeah, I spent some time just watching those videos, and it totally messed up my YouTube algorithm for months after that. You know, I couldn't watch like Pearl Jam videos or like stand-up comedy videos because all I had was all these, you know, prepper dudes, you know, on the suggested videos and all that, right? But yeah, like it was kind of easy to find inspiration for those guys, and then
Mhm.
you know, it made their outcome more satisfying for me in the end too, as the writer, you know. So
Mhm.
so that's sort of the sort of maybe kind of perverse delight you can take as a creator, you know, when you get to kill people off at the same time too, you know. But yeah, that's where that all came from.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So I'm just gonna share with you when 9/11 happened and there was this whole 9/11 truth movement, I was totally part of that. I was in deep. And you actually could see when there was like a shift, an outsiders coming in and really making it about white supremacy at a certain point. So that was when I was like, I got to get out of here. And
Wow.
this was maybe 2010. And that was when I really started to go more political, like mainstream political, as opposed to, you know, down that dark road, because by then the TRC was starting to get going and we could talk about those things then. And
Yeah.
so that's it, it was interesting seeing the switch in those folks that were like just legitimate survivalists. And they were even encouraging me, you got to learn your traditional ways like these white people. But
Hmm.
then we had these white supremacists really infiltrate that movement, and it was time for me to like exit out because
Oh
it was just
wow.
getting over. Yeah. And so I can honestly say I seen that trend in the preppers movement right at about 2010. And that was when I was like, I just got to learn who I am and go down that road instead.
Yeah.
So wild. Okay, so now that Rosemary, we have Naomi. Would you like to chime in?
Hi, thank you, Michelle. This is my first time at the book study, so I'm still getting to know what it's all about. So I really, really appreciate the opportunity. It's so great to meet you. I'm a settler on Treaty 7 territory, and I was raised on Ojibwe and Dakota Oyate territory in what my parents called Minnesota. Um, and what I really appreciated when reading this book, I mean, I read as part of my day job, so I read a lot. I read a lot of like, really action heavy, like commercial fiction and stuff. And something that I really, really appreciated when I was reading this was the way, like there were a lot of moments that were smaller moments like in the book, but they were so impactful for me. Like there was a moment when they're walking and they're not yet in Gibson, and they're trying to figure out, you know, they're trying to anticipate what they're going to get to, and everybody's feeling a little nervous. And I think it's Evan who said that they need to like walk tall and proud. And what struck me in that moment was not just, the walking tall and proud and like that visual, which was a fabulous visual, but the reason that they were doing that was like, it wasn't a defensive posturing or anything. It was very much, we're going to walk tall and with hope that when we get where we're going, we're going to meet more people who care about the future generations the way we do. And I just found that there were so many of these small moments that were so intentional and carried a lot of meaning for me and helped me kind of shift my worldview and expectations for the book, because I too felt that kind of 28 days later feeling where it's like, no, empty house, what's in there? Like there's kind of those moments where I was almost expecting like a jump scare. But in between those kind of like more adrenaline filled moments, there were like just so many quiet moments of power and of intention and like presence in the moment. And I just really appreciated that, because I think something that I'm personally not very good at is like slowing down and really thinking about the intention of my moment. And it just gave me a different way to look at those interactions. Like I can pause, and I can pause in the middle of Walmart, and really think about like, how am I impacting the space here? How am I impacting the people around me? And like, I'm raising 4 teenagers, so it's very important to me to think about those things. So I just wanted to share my appreciation for that. I think you are such a skilled writer, and it was wonderful to read.
Oh, thank you very much, Naomi. I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm so happy that you connected with that. All of that was, yeah, very intentional. I was really fortunate that I had a lot of time to like sit and think about my intentions with the story and what I wanted to get across in those like liminal moments, right? And it's kind of a hard story to really sell in essence, or wrap your head around, because for most of the first part, like the first act is essentially them just walking through the bush, right?
Yeah.
And if you say, hey, this is a story about these characters walking through the bush, like you're not gonna get many eyeballs on it, right? So I had to think about what that moment or that quest initially was going to be like for them, and of course it was going to be one of rediscovery in many ways, but it was going to be mostly empowering, right? It was going to be them liberated by this world-ending moment to freely traverse their homelands again and be themselves and not be constrained by the settler state, or the history of colonialism or the ongoing traumas connected with that, right? Like they could finally be themselves in their homeland. And what empowers them to further move through that are these teachings that they've managed to hang on to. And like a lot of those are teachings that I was really fortunate to be raised with, right? Like I grew up in the bush, and like I've always been raised to like walk through the land with respect and with hope and with admiration, with reverence, right? But also with like caution and with a little bit of respectful trepidation and so on. And these are all things you have to think of before you do that. And I think in a lot of ways, there's this like inherent fear in the way like a settler nation has been created on this land, because that's rooted in theft and deception and so on, right? Like there's something, I think, very ingrained in that fear that a lot of people have just in walking through the bush. But like, I don't really have that. And I wanted to impart that upon these characters too, and show them being empowered people, right? But also like at the same time, being respectful of the land that, they may not be as familiar with. And that's where that moment with JC happens, right? He's forgetful for a moment, and then that ends up being his demise. And that's, like the intentions that we're raised with of how we engage with the land around us and so on. So yeah, I'm really glad you connected with that, because, that's, I think, something, not just like, we all have that in us, whether we're indigenous or not. Everybody around the world comes from like a land-based society, and it's only been in the last like 300 years or so that we've been accelerated into this like technological and industrial era that's disconnected all of us, like myself included. I left the res when I was 19, and I still go back all the time. We have a place there, but like I haven't lived there since then. So I've been disconnected at the same time. So yeah, it's just a matter of trying to be mindful of our presence on the land, and how we can all nurture that together, no matter who we are.
Thank you. That it was so beautifully done. And I do feel that the quiet parts of the book didn't feel quiet. They didn't read quiet. Like I was reading through that first section where they're just walking through the bush, they're not just walking through the bush. Like, there's so much developing in there in terms of my understanding of how they connect with the land, and what they're hoping for future generations. So I just really appreciate it.
Don't be witch. Thanks again. We appreciate that.
I got to tell you, your book is perfect for the man or bear conversation too. Hey.
uh, and I like how, it was touched on that there are these pockets, right? That's what we can hope for. I think all of us who want a good outcome, if, the world as we know it ends, and, like, not to be naively optimistic, but I do believe that would arise. I believe that there would be pockets of skilled, resourceful people who would make that happen. And when I was talking to my dad about this story, like before I started writing it, he's an Anishinaabe elder, and he's taught me so much about what I know of being the Anishinaabe and so on. He raised me and my brothers in the culture and so on, right? When I was talking to him about like this future, after the end, after Moon of the Crusted Snow, um I gave him my basic premise of like this quest, and the people that they would meet along the way and so on. And he said, yeah, like there are these old teachings about Nanabojo societies and Wendigo societies, or communities, in Anishinaabe teachings, I guess. And like that's the whole premise, or the whole idea behind it, is that you can go to like those Nanabojo pockets, or you can find them, and you have to be wary of the other side, right? And like, it's sort of this good versus evil dichotomy arises, of course, but I think that is just sort of a natural way for humans to respond to big moments like this. And yeah, I'm glad that was touched upon, right? That there are these pockets, and I think that was a key part of the developmental process for me when I was dreaming up the story, for sure.
I really loved how much you told through the eyes of that fellow who was half Anishinaabe and was
Oh
a
yeah.
trucker. And like, he was kind of telling this whole story about strawberries and what it was like when all the power went out, and the incredible northern lights, which is also fitting considering what we're all seeing the last few nights. Hey, so,
Yeah.
like, I tell you, I was meant to read your book in the last couple of days. So it's so good. I can't thank you enough for all of that. And I was so sad the way he was just so callously killed, like just turn out, kill him. It was just so sad. So thank you for that. Wendy, do you want to unmute?
Thanks so much. Um, and thank you so much for this book. I'm a white settler here on Treaty 7, and my family's been here for about 4 generations, and as well as in the southwest plains of the United States and on the east coast of Canada. So I will say, Michelle, I had some trepidation that you assigned us this book. Dystopian kind of like that kind of novel is not the kind of thing that energizes me, like, and I think what others have said makes that make sense for me a lot, because certainly the white settler worldview, the Eurocentric worldview is, here's how bad it's all going to turn.
Yeah.
And here's how everybody's going to just take each other down. I think that was a lot of it. And so I read Moon on the Crested Snow first. I wanted to read that and get some context for myself. And I actually, both of them, I ended up listening to the audiobook, and I was so grateful for that. I actually wanted to hear, I didn't want the pronunciations I would come up with in my own head to be what I was hearing. I wanted to hear things properly pronounced. And so just really appreciate that Billy did such an amazing job. It was just a gift to get to listen to him read both of those books. And I think, I've reflected quite a lot on the books. I feel the kind of books that I do like is actually what I felt when I read these, which is really rich character development, like really good interactions between the characters and, what's important to them coming through. Like I just felt like you got a sense of them and just their interconnections, and you just did that so beautifully. So even though I had that trepidation, I really found that I found a lot in these books that resonated and made me want to keep listening. I think that, it did leave me with a lot of thoughts, and others have also mentioned, how do we think about those militias, those people that are out there who are preparing in ways that actually, like, that is not the future any of us would thrive in. It does make me think a lot about that and think about, what are the ways that we've created a path that's different than that. This was just a deepening of my appreciation for what community building looks like in Indigenous communities. I just really appreciated how you wove that throughout. I think the part that I love the most, that I'm hoping you might speak to a little bit, I really appreciated that you had Evan's daughter, Nangon's, go on this travel, like go on that journey. And I can imagine that was a big choice. And my own relationship with my father shaped a lot of my life. Like I'm very grateful for the relationship I had with my father when he was alive. And I think that is a really important kind of relationship. And anyway, it made a lot of difference to me in just the richness of the book and then the journey she was on, and would just love if you spoke about that a little bit more because I think it was a beautiful choice. Thank you so much.
Oh, miigwech, Wendy. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was I think that choice like made the story for me. It was exhilarating to sort of embark on that, and it was scary too at the same time. When I came up with the idea that it would be in the future, 12 years after the blackout, 10 years after the end of the first book, and that would be this quest. The whole reason behind putting it that far in the future was to make the kids more grown up in this new future, right? To have the ones who were just children at the end of the world, who would then emerge in this new epoch, be teens and young adults in the second book, right? Like more fully formed people, I guess. So the quest, obviously I wanted Evan to be a part of that again as like the main character. And Maingan and Nangos would be teens in this new future, and I think I wanted one of the kids to go with him on this quest, as I was building this sort of team of this expedition. And I guess like like the male brain immediately goes to, oh, like the son will go, that's just the way it is. But almost immediately when that popped into my head, I didn't like it. It seemed like a father-son buddy adventure trope, that we've seen over and over and over again in all kinds of stories, in all kinds of media. So I sort of pushed that idea aside almost immediately, and I was like, okay, well, I'll make Mind Gun become a dad right away, so he can't go on this quest. He has to stay home and help Race's daughter. And that opens the door for Nungos. And it just made so much more sense to have her be like the co-main character in some ways. Because, you know, she, you know, is this expert archer. She has all this bush knowledge. She's, you know, one of the best hunters. She has all this medicinal knowledge too at a very young age because she's been able to be raised according to their customs, according to their bush ways, right? And I was like, okay, you know, she's 15, like I'm a dude in my 40s. How am I gonna write about a 15-year-old girl, right? From her perspective. But then I thought, like, I have people like Nungos in my life already. I've nieces, I have young cousins, other community members that I see, you know, at home doing all the same things she does. They're going hunting, they're tanning hides, they're harvesting medicine from the bush, they're making birch bark canoes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're posting all these things on Instagram and Facebook and inspiring each other and so on. And I was like, well, like Nungos is like right there in front of me already. So that's who I'm going to write about, and that's who I'm going to write for is these young women who I'm related to and also in my community who are like leading the way for us, you know, in a much more stronger way than I ever did when I was that age. So it was really like motivating, inspiring, just to settle upon her as like really the central figure in many ways, right? And the figure who is going to carry them into the future, you know. So yeah, there was that, and also like, you know, as I don't have daughters, I have three sons. But I also thought like as a male writer, as a male creative, who's a dad to boys, like it's my responsibility to make female characters, strong female characters. And they already have strong female real characters in their lives, like their mother, grandmothers, aunts, cousins, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, yeah, I have to show them that that's, you know, our responsibility as men to be as inclusive as women and people of other genders as possible, right? That's how we're going to get to a good future, by not just being exclusive as men, you know? So that was another reason why I wanted to do that too. And yeah, it was just like so yeah, it was just so liberating, so fulfilling to have her in the story in that way. And my editor Rick Meyer, like he was so helpful in like really, I think, bolstering her character too. In the first draft, the way it was originally mapped out was like in a weird way, the first half of the story is kind of mostly through Evan's point of view, and then the second half of the story is through Nungos's. And it's that moment in Gibson where she urges him to go on, right? Like she gives him that little sort of pep talk. And from there, that's when like she, I guess, took over the story in that first draft. But then Rick said, no, like you have to bring her in more strongly earlier on, like just to have her present. And also that really helped with the world building, because like she has no recollection of Gibson or of you know the world before, and that helps sort of illustrate for the reader how much things have changed, right? Because pizza is foreign to her, you know, train tracks are foreign to her, websites, everything else that's totally meaningless to her, right? So that really helped, I think, build that world and focus on her and focus on the next generation. So yeah, she makes the story in my opinion.
You know, I'll
Thank you.
just let you know, as a mother of a 17-year-old daughter, how much I like really was getting choked up because like I have to let my daughter go, right? Like they're going to be
Mhm.
doing their own thing here after they graduate from grade 12, and they have to do their own thing. So I just like, I loved you brought that all up, Wendy, because it was really emotional for me thinking like, what if I just had to let her go with my
Mm.
husband and they have to go do this quest that nobody's come home from? I'm like I was just like high anxiety. So thank you. And again, I just want to acknowledge it's Thanksgiving, it's Columbus Day, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. Like I'm grateful you're all here. I can't think of a better way to do this, but I understand it is a holiday. I'm really grateful you came today. I just want to open the floor one more time for anybody to want to build off of what we've talked about before we let him go, because he's been so generous to come tonight at all. Go ahead, Rosemary.
I'll be really quick and I apologize.
Don't be quick.
I'm a
Yeah,
white settler of European origin. born and raised on the stolen lands of the Onondaga Nation in upstate New York. And I've lived here in Waubgeshig for over 47 years. It's not only the daughter who's such a strong character, but like the communities they meet right on the way and at the end of the journey. Women are playing such a strong role. And again, that's in contrast to the militias where it's all men. And we know, right, in general, like speaking of Trump and January 6th, that they're very misogynist, as well as white supremacists. So again, it was wonderful to have that contrast. And also I took great pleasure from how Mother Nature was taking back the land, right? Like coming up through the cement and dragging down those poles and wires. And I love that. I just loved it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, in terms of like the woman influence, you know, that is partially based on like my own upbringing. You know, like I was raised by both my parents who were together throughout my childhood, but my dad, my mom's of settler descent, my dad's Anishinaabe. I grew up in his community, but he like grew up without his dad. His dad died tragically due to an alcohol-related mishap when my dad was only 5 years old. And my grandmother was left to raise 5 kids on her own, and then she adopted 2 more, which was like highly unusual in the 60s when that happened. You know, my dad and all his siblings would have been ripe for apprehension into the residential school system or the child welfare system, right? But my grandmother was able to resist that through all kinds of different like strategies, you know, like she really embedded herself in Parry Sound. I'm from Wissahickon on Georgian Bay, which is beside Parry Sound, Ontario. She embedded herself in that community and took on various leadership roles, and like nobody messed with her. Which was really powerful in, you know, the 50s, 60s, 70s when she was coming into those roles. And she was present throughout, you know, most of my life until she passed about 6 years ago. So like that influence obviously trickled down into all her kids and grandkids, and you know she had mostly daughters, so my aunts were very formidable too, you know. And also like on my mom's side, mostly women, and on that side too, who were, you know, I guess like I really can't stand to use the word progressive, but like that's what they were at the time. I think being progressive should just be like, you know, human empathy should be the baseline anyways, you know. But that gets labeled progressive nowadays, I guess. But anyway, that's what my white family was always. So that's the female influence that I've been fortunate to be raised with. And what was the second thing you raised again, Rosemary? I wanted
Mother Earth taking back the land.
Oh yeah. That was like one of the most fun parts to include in the story. It's just like, yeah, you can show how quickly this can happen, right? And you don't have to go far. Like I posted on my Instagram a few weeks ago, where I went for inspiration for that. Like where we live, there's a new highway essentially, right? And the old highway's been abandoned, as have all the businesses and buildings and so on. And that was only been in the last like 10, 15 years. So if you go there, you see like all the vegetation growing up through the asphalt and breaking through the buildings and the windows and stuff like that. So like you can see that happening in real time if you go to the right places, you know. So that was really fun to try to write that kind of thing too.
Thank you.
Well, that's awesome. God, I love hearing all of this. So I'm really grateful that you came tonight. I just want to give one last call. Is there any other folks that want to weigh in, add?
Feel free. I ask anything if you like.
Hi, it's Kathy Bear again. And I just wanted to say that I devoured the book in less than 3 hours. I just sat down and read that first book in like 2 hours and 40 minutes or something. It was
Awesome.
It was so good. And the second one was almost the same. I read in the evening, then got up in the morning and finished it off. And I found the one death of the red-haired guy. I was like so disappointed. Out of all the deaths, that one really kind of hurt, because it was like I was waiting for him to do something heroic to redeem himself or something, and then he's just like gone. It was so anticlimactic. It was just like, wow. But
Yeah.
yeah, I really, really enjoyed your books, and thank you for coming tonight.
Oh, thanks for reading them. Yeah, Jabdi's that character. Probably my second favorite character in the whole story. Behind Nungos. Because he represents, I think the moral ambiguities of the post-apocalypse. Of the decisions that many of us would have to make to survive. And like with the first book, I see it very much as a very basic story about like the struggle between good and evil at the moment the world ends. And then the second book, because it's farther into the future, you have this survival in effect, as a result of various choices various people have made, right? And I think like some good other examples in other media, like The Last of Us, I think really touches on the series, touches on that moral ambiguity pretty well, and so does this screen adaptation of Station 11, I think does that really well too. Because like a lot of us, we think we know what we'd do, but then a lot of us would have to like dive into that gray area between good and evil to do what's right for ourselves and for our families and so on. And I think Jabdis represents that. And because he's like, he's quote unquote walking in two worlds, right? As a mixed person who's able to pass as a white person, and that's why he's survived, right? And he's also, by his own admission, done some pretty sketchy things for his own survival by passing as a white guy, right? So he's like wrestling with all this, and then they're wrestling with whether they should ultimately accept him. Some of them don't trust him, some of them do, et cetera, et cetera. And then his demise in the end, I think, is just like how, what I wanted to show was how like those militia dudes as white supremacists see life as expendable anyways, and like they think he double crossed them, so they picked him up just like that, right? Which is sad, like I wanted him to live too, but like when I was writing that, it just made more sense to have him, be expendable, unfortunately, for the sake of the story, right? But yeah, I'm glad you touched on him because again, yeah, like definitely my second favorite character in the story.
Cool.
Kathy, I don't know how you were able to read them so quick because I kept crying. I had to like take breaks to cry. I was just too invested. So amazing. Yeah, I think Naomi, you wanted to chime in. Come on in.
Yes, I'll be brief. I want to be respectful of your time. Also really appreciated that you started the book with birth. I thought that was a really cool choice, and I found it quite interesting to see the interplay of people attending the birth moment who were born in a hospital and how they feel like there was almost like an increased anxiety from that perspective, right? That I thought it was very interesting to see the calmness of the traditional ways kind of soothing that anxiety as it existed there. And I also thought that it was a gorgeous like vision for the future and the present, and how people from different walks of life who have very different experiences of the same moment can kind of come together and play to each other's strengths, right? And use whatever experience is going to be helpful to the moment and helpful to the people surrounding them in that moment. There wasn't a right or wrong in that, in it even implied in any way. It was just about two different viewpoints interpreting the same moment differently, and which one is going to get us through this unscathed, right? And I thought that was really beautifully done.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, there's lots I can say about that, and I'll try to be mindful of all your time too. Yeah, starting with that burst scene was I felt like I had to, when the first book came out and I was doing a lot of talks about it and just discussing the themes and all that. Like I always talked about like renewal and regeneration and restoration and so on. But when I really sat down to, I guess, analyze all that, I thought, there's so much death in the first book, and there's not really any instance of actual regeneration, which would be like the reproduction of humans. There's nothing like that in the first book, and when the second book started to become a reality, I thought I have to start it with a birth for that reason in particular. And also like I needed it as sort of like a buffer between the two stories to have this moment of renewal, to sort of bridge these two stories in some ways. And also, like, it's an homage to a lot of the indigenous midwifery efforts happening in communities all over the place, which is really cool to see. And one time when I was talking to my grandmother, shortly after our first son was born, we had these plans to have our son born like in as natural a way as possible, but there's a medical crisis and there's an emergency C-section, and he and my wife were in intensive care for several days after that, so it didn't go as we'd hoped. But I was talking to my grandmother about it, and she said, yeah, like there's so many great things happening in our community where culture, ceremony, everything's coming back. But she said, she didn't think that we could totally get there until our babies were born in our community again. Because for so long, babies had to be born either in Parry Sound or in Toronto. I was born in Toronto, like for several reasons, and or in Sudbury or wherever else, right? But she said, once we have babies being born in our communities again, that's when we're going to be able to fully restore things, because that's going to bring the heart of that movement back to the community, right? Having birth at home, like wow, how much more how much more of a reclamation can that be, right? It's so amazing. So yeah, I wanted to pay homage to like that midwifery effort that's happening. And now in Wasaksing, we have babies being born at home all the time, right? Which is so awesome. So yeah, there's a lot of intention behind that birth scene too. So thanks for raising that.
Thank you. And thank you for all that additional context. It's really, really interesting.
When I was having my daughter, at that time, Ontario was way further ahead with midwifery, and midwifery still wasn't covered in Alberta. And so I had hired a doula to help us because it was $5,000 for a midwife or $700 for a doula. So I got a doula, and I had a really awful experience. In fact, I experienced really systemic racism for the first time and had to really like unpack all of that. So on the International Day of the Midwife, Manmeet Bull, our former MLA for this area, he passed away actually in a car crash. And his auntie was a midwife. And when I talk to conservatives, I always say, well, fiscally, it's more important for, financial responsibility for the majority of the births. It would be cheaper. And he was like, whoa, 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 you don't have to describe this to me. And he worked behind the scenes to get midwifery funded in Alberta. So my daughter was born in 2007. So on May 5th of 2008 in the legislature, they announced that they were going to start funding midwifery in Alberta. So that was really important. And I would say, I would agree with you that has led to so much Indigenous midwifery now in Alberta. And I just want to see that to grow and grow and grow. So, but yeah, unfortunately, it was Ontario that had, already a lot of that in place, but that was the data I used to help get it done here. So that was good. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that, Michelle. Wow.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. Anybody else want to chime in before we let him go? Because he was gracious enough to give us an hour of his time already. I think everyone just really appreciates you, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us for an hour. Thank you for not just writing these books, but I think we have such a responsibility as Native people to, be leading, and you're doing that with books. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm so grateful to read it. I can't wait to see what you do in the future too. So we'll all be the first ones to buy your book or whatever it is that you do, because we're always rooting for you.
Well, Chimigwech, thank you very much, all of you. This is just such a delight to be able to visit with you all. I really appreciate you taking the time to read the story and to just visit with me tonight. It is like the greatest reward to just connect with readers. It takes a long time to read a novel, so I'm always I always recognize that, and just the fact that we were able to come together from so far away online tonight is just so cool too.
Isn't that the coolest? I love Zoom. Right on. Okay, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you online.
Yeah, for sure. Miigwech. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Oh, take care.
Bye-bye.
It's totally That's so great that he came. Oh, we lost some folks. Oh, darn it. I should have let Naomi know we weren't like stopping it immediately. Oh well. You know what? I hope you guys are, I don't know what you think of the next book. My like I was gifted that book, and it's an American book on indigenous like veterans. So I just wanted to like, if you can read it, great. If you can't, I promise I will read it and find some stuff to kind of add to this conversation about code talking. And I'm excited to read this book because it was gifted to me for Christmas, I think years ago already. Um, so I'm excited for that. But I just do want to bring up the reason why I'm reading it on for November is because we'll obviously have Indigenous Veterans Day as well as Remembrance Day. So for me, that was kind of the importance of it. And I just want to encourage anybody to, you know, look at Indigenous veterans in any capacity that you might have. And I'll probably be sharing stuff like that because that's always been of importance to me, especially when I found out later the systemic policies against our Indigenous veterans and realizing what they were up against compared to the non-Indigenous veterans. I'm really offended by that to this day, right? Like, yeah, you can give them the day on November 8th, you can have a statue in Ottawa, but it's still the point, you know, like that systemic discrimination was awful. And you know, obviously going through a lot of this with my friends who have also served anyway, and yeah, are still being mistreated by Canadian society in a so-called time of reconciliation. So I just want to, you know, encourage you, whatever book you want to read, if you can't get your hands on this particular book, you know, I'm sure there's going to be lots of code talking type books that are in the library for us to grab. I guess on Wednesday it opens for the cyber attack. Folks didn't know, but if not, I hope there will be some context for that I'll be able to create for the next book club and tell you all about the book that I was gifted, in the hopes that you guys can find a copy too and go from there. So yeah, thanks folks for coming. Thanks Kathy. Thanks Siri for always making it too. I really appreciate you both, and thank you, Wendy, Rosemary, Kat, for making time today a holiday out of all days. So, yeah.
Thank you. You did the same thing.
Yeah. Thanksgiving's not such a big deal for me, so I didn't care.
Yeah, no, I was used to be really like sharing all of the memes and that, but I have found that, you know, it just doesn't feel right today because of what happened in Lebanon and Palestine in the last, you know, few days. And I really just feel sick. I have a lot of anxiety in my belly about a lot of things. And so this book couldn't have come at a better time, actually. And I needed something to get my mind off of what I was seeing and reading. And yeah, and then the hypocrisy sometimes of our community. I get quite angry at the, you know, it's like skirt shaming. It's like, well, you're not supposed to share Northern Lights, and it's like your fucking band did. So, you know, just, you know, if that's your teaching, great, but you don't speak on behalf of me as a Satu Dene. And, you know, so I just kind of, I get mad because they weren't helping with the Awaton thing. They weren't helping with, you know, defending me as when I was being accused of being a pretend Indian. So I get kind of, I'm kind of annoyed at my community for their hypocrisy on a lot of that. So, yeah, so I'm just, when I don't see people supporting Palestine who are Indigenous, but then, and then I get mad at like the folks that are pro-Palestine that are like, I was a native that's been there for over 10 years with you, but you still choose the more popular one over there. Cool panties, you guys have at it, right? Like I kind of, just the hypocrisy of everything right now is driving me crazy. So these novels are like what is helping me just maintain some balance with all of this. So I appreciate you all. I appreciate you all for reading it and your fantastic feedback. No, Naomi's not here right now, but you know, she gave such great feedback too about the book. So I just want to say thank you all, and appreciate you all. And I know I'll see some of you at WordFest. Actually, Wendy, I don't know if I got a chance to tell you, I did get some free tickets for some WordFest events, but people aren't signing up, so some of them are actually going to go to waste. So just real quick to tell you the events that I have coming up. So I have tomorrow actually is where I'm going to see Murray Sinclair, and yeah, so that's tomorrow. And then we have his son and David Robertson on Wednesday. So I'm not having a full moon ceremony. Thursday I have open, but then there's a Justice for Jackie walk on Saturday. And then there's two events, Tanya Talaga, and then another WordFest event that's happening called Culture Slash with Stephen Graham Jones and David Robertson. So like I have a whole bunch of Stephen Graham Jones books, like tons of them. So I'm super excited for those two. I don't know if you can make any of those, but I do have a few tickets for those. Yeah, and they're probably just going to go to waste, unfortunately. I don't know. I'm sad that more people didn't want to go, but it is what it is.
Thank you for the information. I've written down as much as I could as you were chatting there, and I'll see what's possible.
I can
I
forward
did-
it to you actually, and then that way if you can make any of it, that would be amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I did have a thought just as you were talking about code talking. I don't know if any others have seen it, but September 30th, the Central Library did a screening of Bones of Crows. And there was quite a bit about Indigenous veterans in that screening. So it got me in the mindset of the things that you are encouraging us to think about with code talking. So
Amazing.
it's a good time of year to think about those, but I really appreciated that watching Bones of Crows. I mean, it's there's a lot to take in, but it really was on my mind and continues to be on my mind. So I'm glad you've given us some more ways to explore those thoughts. Thanks very
Yeah,
much.
no, so I guess yeah, maybe we'll talk about that on our book club, and maybe I'll queue up Wendy. Are you using Wendy Lynn? Yeah, okay. Maybe we'll queue up that trailer too and talk about that as something that people can do to learn more, because to me too, it is about that. It's that bigger picture of like, for all of the propaganda I was given about World War I and II by my well-meaning father, right? Like we watched the History Channel together. We did all sorts of things talking about that all the time. These were things that were hidden from me. Not that he meant to hide them. It's just that I just don't think it was something we knew, we talked about. And I think about the fact that I graduated in 1994. I left the house in 1995. And at that time, there were still residential schools and Indian hospitals, right? Like, so I was living in a little bubble with my dad, right? And just kind of, I was completely oblivious to all of these policies that were still in place that really could be harming me at that time, let alone thinking about Indigenous veterans, etc. You know, so. Yeah.
Bones of Crows is also on CBC Gem, which is free. They just sign up for that app and you can watch it there.
It's a movie or a series?
The movie.
It's a movie. Okay, well, I'll sit down and watch it as well. But I did watch Joker 2, and I know it did not get very many good reviews, but if you care about mental health, highly recommend. Yeah. Okay. All right, folks. Anything else? All right. Take care, folks. Have a great day.